Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "We have art in order not to die from reality." This might seem like an exaggeration, but is it really? How much of your day do you devote to watching television or reading a book or scrolling through social media to find something that sparks an emotional response? Listening to music? All of these are forms of art, and it's impossible to imagine life without them. For this podcast, I plan to talk to creative people from all mediums about their creative process, and also about why and how creativity is important to the culture of America. Welcome to the Song of Roland, American Culture at Full Volume, where we turn everything up to 11.
Just a little background on that. I was born very sick with renal failure. My first surgery came at 2 months. I lived with an ileostomy for the first 11 years of my life. And by the time I was 11 or 12, I'd had 14 major surgeries. And there was quite an intense bond with my mom and dad because of that.
I can imagine.
And so when I knew Dad was getting ill, I felt a deep obligation to care for him. Although he assured me I had no obligation, but
yeah,
somebody explained to me obligation comes from a sense of owing someone, and my father didn't want me to feel like I owed him for anything. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, it is nice to be able to repay them for because they put up with a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Damon knows my story, but just briefly, I lost my dad when he was 43. He died of a heart attack. So, and I'm going on 77, and I'm still feeling the ramifications of losing him so young.
Is that right? Yeah.
I was 15. Anyway, it's wonderful to have a father in your life as an adult. And I just have always wondered what my relationship would have been as an adult, because it wasn't all that great as a teenage girl.
Yeah.
So I read something about when you lose a parent as a child, there's something in you emotionally that never grows up. And I kind of believe that that's the case.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, you're kind of stuck as that 15-year-old teenager.
In 2018, Damon Falke, a poet, novelist, and playwright who grew up in America but has lived in Norway for about 13 years, came across a painting on Facebook that drew his attention. He started to notice more pieces by the same painter, a woman named Tabby who lived in Montana, and realized there was something about her work that resonated with him. So they started a virtual conversation that would eventually grow into a mutual admiration and finally a decision to collaborate on a book about the creative process called Between Artists: Life in Paintings and Prose. Tabby, you grew up in California and you had a pretty long career in healthcare before you discovered this passion for art. So you want to talk about that transition?
Yeah. I had a background in diagnostic ultrasound, specifically in cardiology. And so I was involved in the early stages of the development of echocardiography for that application. And in 1990, I met my husband, Bob, and he was living in Stevensville, Montana. And so we got married, and I stayed working in Seattle for another 8 or 9 months until I decided, well, I guess if I'm married to this person, we should live in the same place. So I moved to Montana. and did some consulting, and eventually people forget who you are. And in time, they started a photography school in Missoula. And I thought that sounded pretty interesting because I'd always loved photography and dabbled in black and white photography. And so I took a summer intensive program and just loved it. So I think that was the first time that that creative kind of part of me was exposed and let out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then in time, I kind of moved on from the photography. Well, always photography is always going to be a part of me, but I had an opportunity to take a painting workshop. And so I took that, and it was in watercolors, and I really enjoyed doing that. And so it was just like one thing led to another, and that creative part of my brain started coming out, and I was able to express myself a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kept being open to whatever that journey seemed to be taking me on, and led me to. And 25 years later, here I am, still at it and still learning and still being excited with the opportunities. And certainly
Yeah.
coming across Damon and his work was just the most amazing thing to happen to me as an artist, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to read this quote from your book, Between Artists. When did I become a painter? I am quoting from you, Ruskin, and Dorothea Lange to describe this. I became a painter when I decided I wanted to look behind what I could see and instead paint what was worth telling. So when did that transition happen? Do you have a specific time period?
You know, I don't know that it's ever gone away. I think I've kind of lived that every time I do a painting.
Mm,
And I think that came from a discussion Damon and I were having via email during our collaboration when he asked me that same question. And when I mentioned Dorothea Lange and Ruskin, and I don't have their quotes in front of me, but I kind of mashed them together to kind of come out with that answer because it seemed to fit what I was saying. And I think in my work and my painting, the way I paint, it's very intuitive. And so I
mm-hmm.
kind of feel like there's a part of me inside coming out in every piece of work that I do. And sometimes the expression comes out in very odd ways. And that's why I think some of my work can kind of take a path that I didn't quite think it would, but I allow it to go there.
Right.
And hopefully in the process, there is something to say and something that's understood by the person viewing. And there is that communication that happens as a result of that. But I think probably seriously, maybe 10 to 15 years into this process, I started appreciating that my ability to convey what I was trying to do kind of caught up with my ability as a painter because I'm totally self-taught. So I had to kind of learn along the way and understand the material and understand how to work it and how to work with it. And so when I felt comfortable enough with the paint and the process that I wasn't struggling so much, not that I don't struggle still, but I could work through those little bumps in the road easier and stay true to the emotion and the intention that was going to be in the work in the first place.
So Damon, you grew up in Texas, right?
I lived in Texas till I was about 11 or 12 years old. Then I moved
Oh,
to
okay.
Moab, Utah.
You were talking about your health issues earlier. When did books and the act of writing become part of your way of dealing with your health issues, or was there some other path that brought you to writing?
My dad was a serious reader, and there were always books in our household. And I was introduced to books, um, fine books, I would say, rather early.
Mm-hmm.
So I can remember being 12, 13 years old, and my dad handed me a copy of Light in August, which
Oh,
I tried to read, which was, of course, impossible, at
yeah,
least for me. So there was
yeah.
a sense of being in a very literate household, though a completely unpretentious household. Solace came from the outdoors, though. Solace for
Mm,
me in terms of thinking of where my life had come from and where I was, and these in the very real sense that I would not have a future life. I took a lot of comfort in living in the outdoors, which I did extensively and professionally for a long time. And I think writing was there. I
hmm.
enjoyed writing down little stories or writing what happened on a fishing trip, for instance, or putting thoughts on paper, notes on paper, as I like to call them. And then I had a rather, the classic breakup of boyhood from the girl you believe is your first love, and that sends you into a death spiral of writing if you are
Mm.
inclined that way anyway.
So, what was the first thing you had published?
I started publishing in college. I began college
Okay.
at Stephen F. Austin University and later went to University of Texas at Austin, where I graduated from. And I just started, the initial publications was, little literary journals here and there, some poetry and short fiction. I thought I was going to be more of a short fiction writer, but that didn't, it didn't happen for me. I think.
So, I'm going to read a quote from the book. This is actually the opening quote. I remain a believer in a solitary engagement of art when, like reading, we unexpectedly realize our freer selves. In such a moment of looking, the distance between ourselves and what we see diminishes. You want to expand on that?
Yeah, I think when you engage a piece of art or a piece of writing that you love, in a way, it's a curious process that you become less aware of yourself and at the same time becoming more yourself in the engagements. In other words, the writer is giving something back to you in the story or novel, or the painter is as well. So when I was started looking at Tabby's work, and it's worth saying, I had no idea who had done these paintings I was seeing on Facebook. Um, I didn't. There was no name initially. I had no male,
Oh,
no female, no name, no anything. I was just looking at the
yeah.
paintings, and they had these wonderful things that pull you further in. Say how Tabby manages a horizon. Her horizons are rarely like sharp divides. They're
Mm,
often milky or misted, not intentionally. I don't think. I don't think she's trying to charm us as such. Uh, and when you look at that, or when I looked at that, there's a sense of going into them. And when you go into those places, much like we engage nature, a lot of us who care about nature, you vanish into something that both nurtures you and allows you to become the better part of who you are. I know that
mm,
probably sounds a bit convoluted, but you know, when we come to a work of art, a great book, or perhaps a great painting, I guess in my own life, that's happened probably too often when I've been rather troubled in some way, or rather life is beating me up, so to speak. But as
mm,
soon as you make that engagement, those things that are dominating us, and we're quite selfish about, they're butting heads, and they begin to dissipate. And what happens is that freedom I mentioned. Suddenly you're
hmm.
not trapped by whatever circumstances you're in, at least for a moment, at
Right.
least for a moment. And I think that moment is a reason to go on to returning to art.
If I could
Yeah.
just make a comment about that piece that we included in the book. When Damon and I first connected through Facebook after he saw my paintings, it took a while to kind of get into the rhythm of an ongoing dialogue, but eventually we kind of transition from a curiosity on Facebook friend request to a friendship, and then appreciating each other's work, and then eventually into a really solid focus on a collaboration. And then that collaboration went on for almost 2 years, and it only happened via emails that would go back and forth between us, and the occasional Zoom call. We didn't really use this kind of format very often, which I find kind of interesting. I don't know why, but I have probably 5 3 or 4 inch binders that I printed out all our email exchanges. And that, to me, if somebody was interested, it would be an amazing thing to go through and read, because there's some really interesting conversations we had. And that quote that you read came out of one of our email conversations. And, I'd be interesting to go back and find out what was being said before and after that. But there was an opportunity through that 2-year period to really engage in some, we had lighthearted conversations about what are you fixing for dinner and that kind of thing. But we also got in touch with some things, at least on my part, Damon's questions and just the dialogue we had, and my thinking about, okay, what am I doing here with my work, were things that I wouldn't have probably thought about on my own. But when somebody asks you a question, or you're given the opportunity to think a little bit deeper and express, okay, what is going on creatively inside of you, and what is it you're trying to express, and when it's successful, how does that impact the viewer or the reader of Damon's work, or a viewer of a painting. And I think when you can make that connection, which doesn't always happen, but when it does, I think it's a wonderful thing for the artist who, put that out there, and the person who is reading or looking at a painting, and what they bring to the table and glean from it themselves, and maybe learn something that they didn't appreciate, or some feeling they had came to the surface that otherwise wouldn't have.
So that's the thing that was fascinating to me about this book. And I do need to mention for the listeners, so they collaborated together on a book that's called Between Artists, Life in Paintings and Prose. And to me, it's just a fascinating exploration of not only the creative process, but also what it means to the artists. And both of you are really good at expressing that journey. So I just wanted each of you to explain a little bit about how you went from having these conversations to deciding to actually produce a book out of it.
Yeah, my initial writings for the book, and I wrote 9 essays initially, 9 essays about different sequences of paintings that Tabby had, which is, as a writer, that's quite a bit of work, actually,
Yeah.
to put together that. And I ended up throwing them all out.
She should be really grateful for that. Oh, you did?
Yeah, I threw. Yeah,
Wow.
I threw all 9 essays away because I realized the essays were not representing how I was actually engaging with the work. The essays were efforts to look at the painting, analyze them more formally, make some sort of statement about them, and move on to the next sequence. And I could do that, but ultimately it wasn't representing my relationship to the work. I think it's important to be able to do something like that, though, as a writer. It's like if you only paint an abstract, maybe sometimes it's good to show that you can do something rather realistic. It's much like doing a close reading of a poem, for instance. I was doing close readings when, in fact, as I began to engage the paintings and see parts of my Norwegian life from Tabby's work, and how I was beginning to look, say, I write about standing by my mailbox, for instance, and looking down the road. This happened in autumn. where I found myself not seeing, because I live quite rural in Norway, not seeing one of Tabby's paintings, but having one of Tabby's paintings in mind that was teaching me how to see. And that's a very different thing. And so most of the book is not a kind of one for one. Here's what I see in Tabby's painting. But
Right.
what I do a bit of that. I do a bit of that with some of her paintings, but more what it became was Tabby's paintings, her crossroads, roads vanishing into the woods, the horizons I spoke of earlier, these pauses, this notion of stopping. It was more of a personal engagement of looking at her paintings and carrying them into this life that I continue to lead in Norway. And that's how I was looking at her work, and I felt that was the most honest way to write about them. And that's how the writing evolved.
As Damon said, he initially wrote these beautiful essays that weren't used, and there were a few paintings that I did that weren't included either. And I think eventually we kind of settled into this groove, if you will, that it wasn't so much like Damon said, a one for one. Here I'm writing as a response to a specific painting, but it pretty much as the essays that he wrote kind of follow generally a year time frame, if you will. It's not month by month, but you can tell the seasonal changes are expressed in the essays, and so he kind of moves through a year period. And that was the beautiful thing about this whole collaboration is we had time to have it evolve and take its own form. We weren't forced into a time frame. So we allowed that to kind of just organically become what it was going to be. And then and initially this was all being done and it was focused on the exhibition at the Hockaday Museum of Art. They had asked me to do an exhibition in 2022, but they asked me back in 2019. So I thought, oh, I have a long time to get ready for this. Well, in the process, I became aware of Damon and we became involved, and he liked my work, I liked his work. And then when the Hockaday asked me to do the show, I said, well, how about involving this writer I've connected with in Norway and have him be a part of that show as well? I said, I have no idea what it would be, but they liked the idea of that. So that was kind of the kernel of inspiration for what it could be without knowing what it was going to be. And then in time, we realized, well, let's publish something. And so Damon started, working on that. But the book kind of became kind of an insight into the creative process, like you said. And very much in addition to the essays, which are wonderful, we included some of our email exchanges, which gives a little bit of an idea of kind of the behind the scenes, if you will, of the process of creating something. And then at the end of the book, I did a section talking more specifically about each painting, what inspired it, where it came from. So I think, in total, there's a really nice insight into the creative process of at least these two artists. I would think it's kind of common to everybody who works in that creative world.
Right. Yeah, and it's one of the things. Another of the things that I really love about it is that the essays aren't written in specific response to the paintings, at least not most of them. So I wanted to read from The Place Where We Pick Berries. I really love this passage about sacred places. Each of us harbors sacred places. There may be a wood or field where we played as children, or a sidewalk where we lingered with someone and felt loved. There may be a canyon we found on our own, but also where an ancient people had etched their symbols into stone. There may be a bookshelf or a cabinet dressed in tokens of our dead. There may be a clearing beside a river where we have convinced ourselves no one else has stood or waited. We might consecrate any of these places with 1,000 rituals of the heart. We might sit quietly in them. We might stack a handful of stones. We might leave offerings of flowers or sticks configured into prayers. We might, like some fishermen I know, dip our hands into every new river. We might slip another stone into our pocket and later set it in a bowl filled with other stones gathered from places we have loved. With each trip, with each stone, we give pause to remind ourselves of our beginnings and to reaffirm our future. This is what a sacred place and our rituals grant us. We enter a space of our fullest presence. So I just love that. This whole essay is amazing, but that particular paragraph is such a beautiful reflection on what art means to us and what nature means to us. And it's paired with this wonderful painting of a barn. And so I just wanted to ask each of you to reflect on what was going on when that pairing came up.
Well, yeah, the barn painting is just of a simple little barn that's very near where I was living at the time. But the painting on the next page is the one that Damon had sent me a photo of this place where he picked berries. And he's never really told me exactly where he is because he keeps that a secret. But
which it will remain.
Which it will remain. Because I typically don't paint. I use a photo reference for paintings, but only photos that I've taken. So I very rarely, if at all, paint from somebody else's photograph. However, as you say, reading Damon's words, and he expresses things so beautifully, even without me being there, I felt like I had been there. And so that's the painting that came out of all that, starting from a visual reference of the place. I the combination of that and then reading his words, I felt like I'd been there, even though I hadn't. And I think that's the magic of writing. Good writing is that it transports you to a world that that you don't live, but you certainly can experience through beautiful writing.
Oh, I think we should believe in sacred places, and we should keep them well. Sacred at a kind of basic level means other. It's an other place. And probably all of us have places, whether they're beside rivers or beside a field, maybe a city street, where we can return and feel rejuvenated by the life that we have lived and that the life that we might live. We live in a rather, well, I don't want to comment on present times so much, but I think we need places to return that our engagement with them is unmarred by present circumstances, whatever anyone's present circumstances might be, to remind ourselves there have been and there are things that we might cherish that are outside, in some sense, of present conflict, present concern, maybe too to give us a sense that there's something continual in those engagements. It's a long conversation. They may not end when we end. Another conversation may happen. But we live in a time where I think finding pause, finding a place that reminds us of our better selves, which goes back to your original question of what does art do, what does good writing do? It both takes us out of ourselves and returns us to ourselves. I have no good way of explaining this, but I think many people have felt it. And sacred places happen to be that. In the far north of Norway, to talk a little bit about the berry place, there's a local berry called a multebær, what people call cloudberries. Cloudberries only exist in extreme northern climates. And what happens in the far north of Norway, individuals and families will find their best multebær patches where the multebær grow. They grow completely in wild, faraway places. And they don't tell others where they find their multebær, particularly if it's a great patch of berries. And they go back and they find berries. And there's a kind of ethic in Norway that says you do not pick all the berries. You leave berries for someone else. But you're under no obligation, culturally or otherwise, to report where you find your berries. Because the places where you pick berries are, in a sense, sacred. They are other. That particular berry place is real. I can tell you it's at the end of the world in Norway. And a good friend of mine, Tora, took me to his berry picking place. And after going down a dirt road, after staying at a little place that belonged to his aunt, we walked 5 miles into a valley that approaches the sea. There's no other way to reach it but by the North Sea. And the valley was colored and covered with multebær. Truly a magical thing, truly an other thing, if you will. And we have to guard those enchantments. You'll notice in the book, I don't believe I mentioned the name of an actual town or anything of that nature. And say at the beginning, we talked about my father a bit, when my father allowed me to confirm that I was a writer. I don't believe I mentioned the town. So that's part of saving place.
Well, how did you end up in Norway?
My wife won a Fulbright fellowship, so she was a Fulbright professor of literature at the University of Bergen. And so we ended up moving there for a year, and we knew our circumstances would change in the United States. And it ended up being a much better place for us to live for a lot of reasons. Norway, I'm appreciative of my wife for allowing me to go there and begin a life. And I mean, I don't want to sound trite, but I'm appreciative of what the country of Norway has added to my life. Healthcare, for instance. Healthcare in Norway has been a tremendous gift to me.
They seem to do it better than we do. And
can I give you an honest opinion on that? America has, and I've been in about 20 countries at this point. American healthcare is tremendous. Truly is. The research, it's aggressive, which has certain advantages, but the access is unquestionably difficult for so many people. It's the leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States. And I've just been going through this in my year in the United States. And in Norway, it is true, it's a fully socialized system, though insurance is starting to crop up in Norway, which will cause problems ultimately for the social medicine. And there are times you have to wait. I had to wait on a hernia surgery, for instance, in Norway, but that's not a life-threatening condition. But in terms of general management of a health condition, access to medications, and preventative care for future problems, Norway's quite incredible for that. It's a very non-interventional sort of approach to medicine, but they want you to be well. And expense or cost is not the first consideration. I've lived in Norway for over 13 years at this point, and no medical doctor or any sort of medical unit of any kind has asked me, do I have enough money?
Right.
And I can't tell you how many times that has happened to me in the United States. But that's aside, you can let that go.
Yeah.
This is from an email exchange. It is good to be aware when you find yourself in trouble that it's your own banging and clanking that is drowning out the quiet path that is there patiently waiting to show you the way. And what I was, another way of saying that is you got to get your own self out of the way. And I'm just assuming this is a general issue with any kind of creativity. But in my case, in a painting, that's I know when I'm in trouble, when I become nitpicky and am too focused on a technique or fixing something or an area of the painting that just isn't working right, rather than kind of stepping back and just taking in the whole experience in front of you and what you're trying to express, rather than worrying about this, inch square of a painting that has something going on. So I think often in my case anyway, if I'm having trouble, I need to look at myself as being the cause of it, and just give the painting a break and me a break from each other and getting away from it, and then come back to it. So as I said, I paint very intuitively, and if I find myself working too hard at it, it's telling me that the painting wants to go someplace else, and I'm forcing it in a place that it doesn't want to be. And that's a really bad place for me and a bad place for the painting.
I'm sure that happens with writing too, right, Damon?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm sure you know this. It's very easy to over-edit, for instance. It's easy to overwrite if you get sort of attached to your own voice. I've been thinking about this lately, how much intuition plays in creative work. I think you have to get to a certain skill level with whatever you're doing. You have to get to a certain understanding of how techniques work, what you're trying to do. But we seem to hit a point at a lot of different layers of creativity where intuition matters. This happens in higher forms of physics, for instance, where intuition becomes a critical part of your understanding. You can't start there, I don't believe, quite successfully anyway. But it seems to be a point one reaches if you stay in the process of writing, painting, or I mean, frankly, even for higher forms of mathematics, there's a kind of intuition that you don't necessarily become dependent upon, but you become more inclined to listen.
Yeah. So the best example of that for me was when I was in graduate school, and we had a pretty small group in the program I was in. It was 11 people, but it became pretty clear over time that some of these people, their feedback was, for a while, I think there's a tendency to try to please everybody in the group. You take all this feedback and you're just like trying to soak it all in and apply it to what you're doing. And eventually you have to realize, that not every single suggestion is valid. So that's where the intuition comes in, I think, is when you're trying to sort out the voices that either have the wrong idea of what you're trying to accomplish, or they're just being nasty for some reason or whatever.
That seems right. Might take you a while to get there, and it just takes a long time for most of us. I can believe there are people who come into the world and happen to be very good writers or very good painters or whatever they do. But I think for most of us, it's kind of a long struggle of making mistakes, failing in various ways. Imitation seems to be common with writers, at least in the beginning. Hemingway imitating Wing Larder, for instance, early in his days as a writer. But then you sort of know who you are as a writer, or become to know who you are as a writer, and you stay loyal to that more or less. Not at a fault, but you more or less know what you're trying to do and when feedback is useful or when it's not. I completely agree that not all of it is useful. You're right.
Yeah.
Your
Right.
your comment about what you're trying to do, I just very briefly, there was a painter, sadly, he's not with us anymore, but a Montana, very famous Montana painter, Joe Abrisha. And I was lucky enough to take a workshop with him very early on in my painting journey. And he was talking about how important it was to know your intention. And so he came up to me and I was working on this painting and he said, turn around, put your back to the painting, tell me what the painting is. And I started to tell him, well, this is this. And he said, no, what is it you're trying to express? And he kept pushing me down this path that I really had to think about, okay, what am I trying to do here, you know? And he was like, okay, you have a collector on the telephone and he's considering buying this painting. How are you going to describing this painting to him? What is the emotion in the painting? What is it that you're feeling as you're painting it? So I described this glowing thing of the lake and peaceful and this and that and the other. And he says, okay, turn around and look at the painting. And I turned around and it was as if somebody slapped me in the face. It didn't look anything like what I was describing this painting was. And that was like, and obviously 20 some years later, here I am telling the story, but it really made an impact on me. And I think if you're being true to the intention as you're working, at least for me, on the painting, you know when you're starting to stray from that. And sometimes the straying takes you to a place that you didn't think you were going to go, but you like, and you let it go that way. But if you really know what you're trying to do with a piece of work and you want to stay true to that, it's pretty obvious when you're going sideways and you need to come back. So I always appreciated Joe's insight on having an intention when you start with something, which maybe gets back to Damon's point of sometimes, I mean, if you're just out to do a color field painting or abstract painting where it's not based on any sort of reality, then I guess you're just going with the process, and that's the intention, is just to go with whatever comes out that day that you're pressing on the canvas. But if you really are coming at a painting with a intention of something, then if you can stay true to that gets you a long way to having a successful piece of work, I think.
Right.
There was a line from The Scent of a Thousand Rains that still haunts me. I don't have the book yet to look it up, but it said something like, she had forgotten that someone had once dreamt of her. I hope I didn't mangle that too badly, but the sentiment conveyed in so few words is so powerful.
Okay, so then Damon's response is, the woman in The Scent of a Thousand Rains. I'm glad you like that line. Curiously, I've heard from several women about this line. Women who forgot anyone had ever dreamed of them. Some women forget their own present beauty. They forget that very likely someone loves them erotically yet respectfully and would go with her anywhere, would touch her, would appreciate the life she brings and can give. Yet this is quiet. It is quiet in the woman who forgets. We might see her beside a window, staring out at a rainy street. We might see her in a cafe, in a chair beside the sea. And then there will be a glance, a look, a blush, a timid smile, and something of who she was and who she still is returns. It is unexpected, but she realizes the grace of her own presence. All who have loved her and whom she has loved are forgiven in that moment. What is left of her and her lovers is only the good, only love, only beauty. She needs no other confirmation of this. But then she forgets too soon, and that enchantment is lost. Paint her, Tabby.
Yeah, right. Okay, so this was written in January 22nd of 2020. In May, I sent this email back to Damon.
Right.
Well, this was fun. I took a selfie in a dark space, thinking I would use it as a reference to paint Our Lady who forgot that anyone had ever dreamed of her. Paraphrasing you. Your actual words were of women who forgot anyone had ever dreamed of them. That literally stopped me in my tracks when I heard those words in the scent of a thousand rains in Spokane. I knew I wanted to paint something that related to that feeling in those women. As you mentioned, several women have commented to you about those words. You can count me among them. I had a chiaroscuro effect planned, a very black background with strong shadows. Over time, I decided to continue with that thought, but offer a happier ending for your women, or at least offer some hope. So I followed your sentence with one of my own. Women forgot anyone had ever dreamed of them. Then she remembered. I was just scumbling the paint on the canvas, getting the value areas down, using a rag to wipe away the light areas, and then she started to appear. I tried to stay very loose and just provide a hint of shape, etc. I think I'm going to leave her just like this. No additional paint, just a thin veil of transparent wash to tell the story as if in a dream. I think she will be beautiful when she dries and can be varnished. I wonder if Our Lady or other women who have forgotten or lost that part of themselves that inspired dreams are just trying to survive. And in that survival mode, there is a loss of identity. Yes, I'm projecting here, I know of what I speak. And then one day, maybe for just one moment, a flicker of light ignites an awareness that it is going to be okay. An awareness that you are. Our Lady sees that she exists, and because of that, she is capable of being a part of hers and another's dreams. That was what I wanted to come through in the painting.
So, Damon, can you tell me what your first reaction was to this painting?
Well, it's my first reaction was to be impressed by her optimism. like, God, this is the one who can go forward. So, because I'm not that optimistic of a person, so that was my first reaction. Wow, that's awfully hopeful. Nice to have a hopeful person in my life. My first reaction was of the painting, aside from my sort of hesitation at optimism.
Here's a
Uh,
little reminder, Damon, since you know
yeah,
how
no,
to.
I remember it. It was the shadows. It was the shadows of it. It was the face glancing out. It was kind of like seeing someone who's seeing themselves. So, which is interesting to observe. Someone seeing
Yeah.
themselves.
And I
Well,
think one of the
go ahead.
powerful things about Damon's writing is how very often he allows the reader to see parts of themselves in the words that he writes, and it's true. When I went to Spokane to see his play "Son of a Thousand Rains," when the actor spoke those words, it just like was a gut punch. And you know, I think many women do have those feelings at one time or another in their lives, um, and it's amazing that this man wrote it. You know, it's like I could see a woman writing it, but here is this man that is so perceptive and writes those kinds of words and is in touch with those kind of feelings. I mean, that's pretty amazing to me.
Yeah.
Faulkner gave the only piece of writing advice anyone ever needs, and he did it in his Nobel Prize speech. Write about the human heart in conflict with itself, and I mean, I think that's part of what happens in that painting. You actually see the human heart in conflict with itself, and I think if a painter, a writer can stay in that struggle, you're staying in a pretty fine struggle, I think.
Yeah, that's for sure. internal conflict is always good for dramatic tension. So I wanted each of you to describe what it was like when you guys first met in person after all this intense exchange.
Well,
how long was it?
3 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, maybe not 3 years. Let's see. Damon's first email or reach out on Facebook was in 2018. And then in 2019, I think, is when I went to Spokane. No, it really was almost 3 years because our show at the Hockaday was in June of 2022. And Damon came over to the States in November of 2021. He was doing some work with his other collaborator, Charlie Pepitone at Gonzaga. And then he combined a trip and came to Montana, and we visited the Hockaday. So in November of 2021 would have been his first trip over. And so I drove over to Spokane to pick him up and then driving back to Montana. And I remember walking into Charlie's house, and there's Damon standing there. And I think I said, it was like, I feel like I'm looking at an avatar, because to have the really intimate relationship that we had through this collaborative process, which I also write about in the book as well. The fact that there were 5,000 miles between us and the time change difference, and he's in Norway and I'm in Montana. And then the other thing that was going on during that whole collaboration was COVID hit in 2020. So there was this isolation that was going on here in the States, more so I think than maybe Damon appreciated, because he's already isolated up there in the far north of Norway. But through our email exchanges, because you're writing and you're doing email, you had this kind of safe buffer, if you will, that allowed an intimacy in feelings and thoughts to be expressed that you don't normally share with people, but there was a safe place to do that there. And so anyway, so then this person is like, you're right there, and it was pretty jarring. And then we probably was nonstop talking from Spokane back to Montana. Just it was pretty powerful experience for sure. But it was like I had this avatar person. He's not really real, because the real Damon lived on my computer somewhere.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I'm different from how I write too, as a lot of writers would tell you. No, there was this weird space of being in between the reality of Tabby and this constant correspondence. And I'm pleased to say that the constant correspondence is still in existence, still a deep friendship, I hope, and a generosity towards each other. And then, of course, I was struck by Tabby's gorgeous hair. She has all this lovely blonde hair that just piles off her head, which I understand is superficial, but it's part of who she is. And of course, I was struck by that. There's nothing wrong with saying someone's lovely. And she certainly was, but there was a gap between an email correspondent and somebody right in front of me. Of course, that's an odd transition.
Well, I was fortunate to be there for that presentation you guys gave at the Hockaday, and it was just really powerful for me, and then the play too. So it's really a pleasure to sit down with you guys and talk about what this collaboration was like and what it meant to you. And I'm happy to hear any other thoughts either of you would like to offer about it before we wrap up here.
I'll go ahead, Tabby. I think the important thing, not the important thing, but one aspect of this, and it was nothing I had anticipated. This is still a very active friendship, relationship, collaboration. We have a new collaboration coming out in September, which I'm sure Tabby could tell you more about, but it's a collection of 9 paintings and 9 poems called Stops Along the Way, which I'll be excited to see. But I think there's still a richness, and for both of us, and there's no need for either of us to be terribly personal. It's been a difficult year for both of us in very different ways, and for, I'm sure, somewhat different reasons. And to have someone to hold a certain confidence with, or to have someone who understands struggles that are particular to an artistic or creative life. I don't want to put too much weight on that, because I don't know that writers or painters should think of themselves as so very special, but it is nice to have someone that you can share close confidence with in talking about the work, or talking about, and often it's the failures of what you've tried to do and so forth. And so I'm deeply appreciative of that, and I don't see that changing. It evolves as friendships necessarily do, but I think there will always be a respectful confidence and friendship there. I'm grateful for that.
Yes, I think being able to have the friendship and collaboration that Damon had brought, but as an artist, where you have those peaks and valleys where you're either producing work or you're not producing work, you're still thinking about that work in your head. And so to have someone to kind of talk through those periods of time that are difficult when you're not creating, I think is very helpful. And then, as Damon said, we are working on a smaller little project, but focusing on paintings and poems. And as he said, I think the Stops Along the Way is a great title. Obviously, Damon titled it, because it does get us in touch with those little moments that everyone has in their lives. And hopefully this little show of paintings and pairings with his poems will allow people to stop along their own path and think and about what's happening in their lives. And it's that opportunity to give energy back to the universe. And I appreciate this discussion as well. It's just an opportunity to have that creative flow take a different direction and continue on with other people. And that's the beauty, I think, that has come to me from my relationship with Damon, is to have a place for that energy to go and see where it may go in the future. It's as well as a lovely man to send emails to. So it's all good. And I was able, I got to say, I was able to go to Norway and visit Damon and his family in 2023. A friend of mine who is a second generation Norwegian, she and I went to Norway, and I got to see all those places that he writes about, which was very special.
Except the berries.
Didn't get to see the berries.
Not to see berries.
No berries. No berries. No.
Well, thank you for taking the time, both of you. This was great. I know you're busy, Damon, so thank you so much for taking time to do this. And it was a great discussion.
Russell. Thank you for taking time.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Russell. It was wonderful to see you and great to see Damon.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Thanks. I want to thank Tabby Ivy and Damon Falke for a stimulating conversation about creativity and mutual collaboration in the arts. You can check out Tabby's paintings at tabbyivy.com, Tabby, and you can order Damon Falke's books at They Recommend In Between Passing. You can also order Between Artists, their collaboration, at either one of these websites. Thanks to my son Fletcher for the music for this podcast, and please join me again next time for The Song of Roland.